Feel these nipples!
Hey guys, Jim here. Welcome in once again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the FOBOS Knives Tier 1 BC in MagnaCut, the newest variation of the Tier 1 model. When you look at a lot of FOBOS knives, you're going to see the obvious design inspirations of tactical style knives, naturally because their creator, Eric Hansen, spent a lot of years, nearly 30 years in the service, in the Special Forces, and working around people that know how to use this shit properly. And well, let's be honest, most of the people watching this video right now don't actually have knife fighting skills and really would not be best served with a knife to use as a self-defense option. However, if you need to, this certainly will do the trick. But this is going to be more of an all-around, multi-role kind of knife that's going to be really good for use outdoors. If you're doing camping, if you're doing hiking, if you're doing any kind of trail stuff where you're going to be out there in the elements, you may need to build your own shelter, you may need to hunt and clean small game, this is going to be the knife for you. It's going to be great for pretty much everything that you could come across out there. And also, let's not forget about EDC users as well. You want to cut some zip ties off something, cut down some cardboard. You've got a design here that's going to fit right in the hand. It's going to stay solid right where it needs to be without twisting and torquing. It's going to be a useful and safe option for you to use. There have been plenty of times in my life that I've used the wrong knife for a task, and I've gone to cut something, and I've actually created a little bit of a danger for myself by not using the right kind of knife. This is the kind of knife where you may look at it and go, this is going to be great for this, this, and this, but what you don't realize is pretty much everything you throw at it, it's going to work. One of the things that I do when I'm designing one of my knives is I try to look at it from the perspective of anybody that may come across it. Maybe you're not going to watch a video where I describe to you what the main purpose of the knife is. Maybe you're not going to see any kind of promotional material that describes what the ideas behind the knife were. You just want a really cool knife to do really cool shit. And what you need to think about when you're designing it is, I want somebody to be able to pick up this knife and use it for pretty much anything. You're going to have your ideas, your focus on what the knife is going to be best suited for, but it really needs to be something that somebody can use in nearly every reasonable situation. And Eric has a real knack for doing that. From his handle designs, from the way they're shaped, to the materials that he uses, the texturing on those materials, where he places his jimping, where he places his finger choils, everything about his knives, from what I've seen so far in the 3 examples that I have, are really well designed to be used for almost anything that you could want to use them for. Now, I'm going to kind of go in order through the knives as my preferences grow for them. So when I get to the 3rd version, you're going to find my personal favorite knife out of the 3 that I have. But that doesn't say anything about the first 2 that I'm doing here. I'm obviously starting with this one because it's maybe the most recognized pattern that FOBOS Knives does. So I wanted to make sure I got this out here first. Plus, they're just now becoming available, and I thought that was important that this video come out very close to the time that they're going to be available at the dealers like DLT Trading. So let's take a good close-up look at this knife. We'll talk about the design aspect of it. We'll talk about its utilitarian functions. We'll talk about even down to how he's designed where the bevel height stops, what the angle is for each of the bevels, and why they're going to be useful for a variety of different tasks. right, let's get some close-up looks at this beauty and see what it's really all about. I really like the feel in the hand. I love the balance of this knife. The overall design is, again, it's still got that very cool, tactical look going on, but it has a very practical side to it where you don't feel like you have to be some kind of mall ninja to run around carrying one of these. It's going to actually fulfill a role. It's going to fulfill a need. It's going to perform the way that you want it to perform, specifically with the choice in the materials. By using MagnaCut, now you've got a blade that's going to hold an edge for a good long time and have a really good degree of toughness if you're doing any hacking or you're cutting into unknown materials that may have something like, maybe there's a staple in the middle of the box that you're cutting down and you hit it with the edge. That normally spells trouble for most high-end steels that are being used for knives. But with the MagnaCut, you have far fewer reasons to fear using it. Now, let's talk very quickly about the differences between the full-size Tier 1C and the new Tier 1 BC. Because I was a little confused myself because it wasn't readily apparent by looking at pictures. But it's when you look at the spec sheet that you really start to see the breakdown of the differences. And I had messaged back and forth a few times with Eric about that, just to make sure that I had all of the differences properly listed and I didn't make any mistakes. So I don't want to misrepresent his product, especially with the rabid fan base that he's got. Having a Facebook group and everything else. If I come out here and say the wrong thing in the wrong manner, they're going to jump down my ass about it. So I wanted to make sure that I had all the info correct. So if you look at the standard Tier 1C, you've got a 12-inch overall length with a 6.5-inch blade, and the BC is 11.2 inches. So it's almost an inch shorter with a 5.85-inch blade. And he says BC actually stands for boot/choil. And I was under the impression that maybe it stood for bushcraft or something like that because of its multi-roll design. And I was incorrect. So I'm glad I verified that. He says that the genesis of the Tier 1 shape came from a photo of a fish that was taken on a military dive that he was part of off the coast of Jordan in the Red Sea. He says he saw a knife in that fish. He just saw this outline, the shape of a knife as they developed the photos. And he sat down to draw it that night on the roof of a building. And he just went with what was pouring out of his head. And he didn't make any major alterations between that sketch and the actual overall shape that you're seeing here. Now, the initial knife that he designed was the Tier 1 Mini. What has become the most popular, believe it or not, have been these larger size Tier 1s. And it took him by surprise, and I think it would take pretty much anyone by surprise because the Tier 1 Mini is a lot more of an EDC-sized knife that you could carry along with you for pretty much anything. You could be hiking, camping, whatever, that kind of good stuff. But you could just be walking around as a regular, everyday person. You could be riding your motorcycle. You could be doing whatever and be able to carry and most likely conceal that smaller-sized Mini. I really like the Mini. I think it's damn cool. I've taken a few looks at it on different dealer websites and went, shit, that thing is really awesome. Because for me, on fixed blades, I tend to gravitate toward more smaller designs, like this Les George design from ProTech, this Night Watch interloper made by my good friend Alex Harrison. Really, really nice handmade custom. My Tibia design. I like stuff that's just a little bit smaller. This was the Riyadh collaboration I did, by the way. Things that are a little bit smaller that can be concealed a little bit more easily because I'm a regular dude. I'm a regular civilian, and I'm not an outdoorsman. So my primary uses for a knife primary considerations, I should say, are going to be concealability. I want to have that fixed blade with me for the times that I may have something come up where a folder may not be the best option, but I don't want a big giant knife hanging down my leg. It's just not my style. The largest fixed blade design that I typically carry was this collaboration that I did with my good buddy Mike Stewart. This was based on his woodwalker design that I did the grinding and everything on, and I fell so much in love with it. We had done 5 knives in the collaboration that we were doing that were all going to be auctioned off and stuff like that. And I fell so much in love with this knife. Number one, because it was the very first time I had ever freehand hollow ground the knife. And as you guys know, I typically stick with flat grinding, but I was just starting to get into hollow grinding, and I figured, oh, screw it, I'm going to try it on this and see how it comes out. And I really liked how it came out. And I loved the size and the shape of it based off of his design, that I went, yeah, I don't want to sell this thing. Let me just pay you your half for it, and I'm going to keep it and I'm going to carry it. And that one's got a lot of use. And that is about the largest size of fixed blade that I typically carry. Now, when you get into something like the Tier 1 BC, yes, it is a large knife, but it's still not considered a large fixed blade. I keep correcting myself when I say large as well. It's more of a medium to large size, because there are certainly a lot of very useful knives for the person with the more active lifestyle, that outdoorsy lifestyle, that's going to be carrying something with a blade that's an inch, 2 inches, 3 inches longer, overall size of 3 to 4 inches longer, and in a lot of cases much heavier, especially more heavy toward the blade end, so they can do some light chopping and things like that. So for me, this is a little bit large to say, yeah, I'm going to EDC a knife like this. This is a knife that lends itself well to being carried because of the way that Eric designed this sheath. And again, I have to go back to this sheath because it is so beautifully made. The quality of the materials is fantastic. The construction is fantastic. And the methods of carry. So you can hang it off of your belt and have it hanging down your leg if you want to. You can unsnap these straps here, and you could do scout carry. You could do what I like to do is I tend to carry kind of a cross draw in front of my left hip bone. So think if you're wearing jeans, right in front of my left jean front pocket, I tend to carry a knife kind of at an angle, kind of a downward angle, so I can unsnap it and just kind of pull it right out. And that works well for me. This might be a little bit large for carrying in that manner. It's just gonna poke out. There's no t-shirt in the world that's really gonna cover that up and not make it look like you're carrying something very large in front of your body. But for somebody that likes scout carry, this would work well. I still tell people I don't recommend scout carry because even though this is obviously not an overly thick knife, you've still got probably just under an inch in overall thickness back here. And if that is right across your spine and something were to happen, whether you're a complete klutz and you tend to fall all the time by yourself, or you were to get into a fight or a shoving match and get knocked onto your back, if you land smack on this kit as it's sitting across the small of your back, you can actually do some very, very serious damage to your back. So I always tell people, if you can avoid it, don't do scout carry because there's that. Plus also, if you're in the mindset of always having situational awareness, you're always aware of people in your bubble and stuff like that for self-defense, you're standing in line somewhere, you bend over a little bit, and all of a sudden somebody notices that you've got this huge, what they're going to assume is a knife across the back of your belt line. Now you're presenting to them a weapon that they can access that you can't easily guard against. So I still don't see that as an optimal way of carrying. Obviously, if you're out in the woods, you don't really have to worry about that. Bears don't typically try to disarm you, and you're probably going to be okay on that. Be careful on the rough terrain that you don't slip and fall and land on your back and go back to problematic option number one. But with that long-winded bit of shit out of the way, what I'm trying to say is this sheath is wonderful in the fact that it gives you a multitude of carry options. You're not just stuck with one option. And also you do have this leather loop here to put a ferro rod on. Since you do have this ferro rod notch that's in the spine of the blade, I've seen a couple of videos where people have played with the tier ones that have this notch and use it on a ferro rod, and it just absolutely showers sparks. There is a nice, crisp, defined edge right there that when you're scraping that against the ferro rod, it's just going to shoot sparks all over the place. So this is going to be, again, a useful knife for a multitude of tasks. Let's talk very quickly here about the specs. I've kind of foregone my TLDW in this video and my previous two videos because I've kind of gotten excited about what I'm showing you, and I've gotten kind of wrapped up in just talking. So I apologize for that, but here we are getting into the specs. You are looking at an overall length of 11.87 inches from tip to pommel. The blade length is 5.8 inches. Blade thickness is 200 thousandths of an inch thick. Your blade steel this go around is MagnaCut, and that is another big difference between the Tier 1 BC and, say, a Tier 1C. So instead of having CPM 3V or S35VN that you had in those knives, now you're getting into MagnaCut, and that's going to be a very big upgrade for a lot of people. I really can't see anyone having any complaint about a useful utility knife being made in such a great steel. Blade finish is a PVD, so you've got this black oxide PVD coating. Handle material is textured G10 that is also jimped. The jimping does follow through where all the jimping is in the steel. Your weight is a massive 9.4 ounces, and these are made in the USA. So they're designed by Eric in the USA. They're made by his team in the USA. And that's why this is not a $200 knife or a $150 knife. These are $385 because you are paying for the expertise in design. You are paying for Eric's watchful eye over the entire production, his quality control once that production is finished, and the fact that the production has been carried out in the U.S. These are not outsourced overseas, which if they were, I would have no complaint as long as the quality and the price point were appropriate for that. But they're made in the USA. There's always going to be a premium for that because you just can't produce anything in the United States for anywhere near the cost of what you would pay in Thailand, in the Philippines, in China, or any other South American factories, things like that. You're always going to pay that premium. And for people that love to jump on YouTube review videos and bitch and scream about a knife made in China, that should really be made in the USA, I would pay the extra premium. Well, it's time for you to put your money where your mouth is. If you look at this knife and you comment down below, that's really great, but not for nearly $400, I'd be in for maybe $200, well, then you're the guy that should be buying the knives that are made overseas and not constantly be up on your soapbox about made in the USA. I support made in the USA. I think it's a very, very big deal. It is a point of pride to be able to support an all-American company, but it's just not always possible. From your washer and dryer to your microwave oven to your dishwasher, your HVAC unit, parts on your cars and motorcycles and things like that, you are still always going to be supporting at some point the Chinese economy, and that's just the way it is, truthfully speaking. Now, let's talk about design here, as I was alluding to in the intro. it can be tricky sometimes to sit down and sketch out a knife, even a fixed blade, and say, okay, this is what I believe my overall aesthetic needs to be, and here's what I believe its intended purpose is going to be, and marrying those two things together. And then coming up with, okay, now I've got the profile of the blade laid out. I know what shape I want it to be in. Where do I want to lay in the grinds? What kind of grinds? So you're going to go with something that's obviously it's going to look good, but its primary function is going to be to actually be utilitarian and perform well as a cutter. So you may draw it with a bevel up to here and think, oh, that looks really good, and a nice sweeping plunge and a cool tip grind and all kinds of neat shit. But then you go to make that prototype and you realize if I'm only bringing my bevel up this far, that's severely going to change what my bevel geometry is going to be, and how much of a stark difference that's going to be when you get down to the secondary bevel geometry. So you're having to sit down and you're having to figure out what you want this knife to be for. If this is just going to be a chopper and it's going to do some gross cutting tasks, not fine cutting tasks, then you may be able to go with that lower bevel and be just fine. But for something like this, where he knows that, you know, you could be cutting rope, you could be cutting twine, you could be cutting paracord, you could be feathering wood, you can be slicing some meat, you could be slicing some vegetables. You want kind of that all-around experience, and you still want the toughness to be able to hack at some maybe some harder things. So bringing that bevel all the way up here and then intersecting it with the flats and then your swedge up here, this additional swedge he's done back here. And this is going to reduce a lot of the weight on this half of the blade. Having to put all those things together, a lot of times you think it looks really, really great, and then you test your prototype and realize, no, I got to go back to the drawing board and change a few things. And that's what I say. That's why I say when you're designing a knife, it's a little more challenging than just finding a shape that's pleasing to the eye. Another thing that I really like that he focuses heavily on is the shape of his handles. The height and the thickness are all very, very important. In my hands, I have very large hands, so my hand very easily wraps around this handle. It may feel a little bit narrow and a little bit small. For me, I could go with something that's a little bit beefier and a little bit chunkier. Again, like I showed you on this one, that fits a little bit better in my hand. However, this is going to give me the versatility of a lot of different grip options. If I'm going to, hammer grip, saber grip, reverse grip, anything that I want to do with this knife, I feel that organically it flows with the shape of the palm of my hand very, very well. Hey guys, sorry for the interruption, but I promise I will make this very, very brief. I want to thank those of you that have joined and become channel members. You are helping to support the channel and helping to continue the growth. And if you've been considering supporting the channel in any way, shape, or form, because I do not have channel sponsors, I don't shill anybody's products, I don't get paid for anything, I don't do affiliate links, so everything is completely self-funded. If you'd like to help out and watch the channel grow and get more great content coming your way, please do consider becoming a member. And added to that, he's done a great pattern of texturing into the handles as well. So each of the G10 scales have really nice texturing. There's some milled out or filed out areas there. And then as I mentioned, he's matching up to the jimping that's in the spine of the blade. And I'll never understand why people will design a knife. They'll put some sort of jimping, whether it's the gear style jimping like this or very, very fine jimping, and run it all the way far back into where the scale material is, and then not correspond that to the scale material. So at that point, unless it's a raised gear style like this is, it's not going to do you any good, because generally you know, you're actually, this is slightly shadow boxed. That's not a good example. Here, I'll use this as an example. So if I had a lot of jimping right here on this particular knife and the scales weren't matched, the scales would prevent the jimping from doing their job because I wouldn't be able to push in as effectively because the scales are stopping my thumb from really getting a good purchase on that area. And that's really what jimping is all about. It's about a good, strong purchase aiding in your grip so the damn thing doesn't slip out of your hand when you're using it. He's done a great job by not overly contouring this where it's kind of like a shapeless blob. There is a very clear, defined shape to these scales, but everything has been melted down very, very well, so it's extremely comfortable, but yet you still got the flat scale sides that prevent the knife from easily torquing and twisting in your hand. Another thing that you want to think about is when you're using your knife, you always want to be able to index it easily. You want to know where that edge is facing as you grab the knife. And there are it's almost like memory bumps all over this knife that once you've used it enough, you're going to remember where this divot is, that your finger may hover over it or you may feel it there. You're going to feel this choil here, this cutaway. You're going to feel the jimping. You're going to feel every little part of all these textures. And you're going to know precisely where your cutting edge is at, even if you're not looking intently at what you're doing, which you should be, but shit happens and we get distracted. That's the way it is. So anyway, that's my thoughts on the overall design and the feel of the knife. I think that if you're actually using your knives, if you had the need for a fixed blade that's going to perform with high-grade steel with a damn good, solid heat treat, because remember, these are cryo-tempered as well, so that grain structure is being drawn out and sucked in and as tight as humanly possible to create the strongest blade that you can get out of this material. Because don't forget, you've got this pommel back here that's a really great attitude adjuster. I'm not really sure it's really intended to be a glass breaker. I'm sure you certainly could break glass with that. But this is going to be really good if you have to kind of beat into something or bang something out. This pommel is going to be super tough, and being in MagnaCut, properly heat treated and tempered, it's going to hold up and last a while. So overall, if you're looking for a mid to large size fixed blade that's going to be good if you want to carry it as a tactical, a third, fourth, fifth kind of backup to your primary weapons as self-defense, if you want to carry this for any outdoors activity, if you're into camping and hunting and hiking and all that kind of outdoorsy, woodsy, fishy kind of shit, this is going to be great. I think that you could probably still use it for food prep and things like that because while it's not a super slicey, paper-thin edge, it is thin and sharp enough that I've had success. You can see that I've used this a little bit for some cutting, that it's sliced really, really well. I wouldn't be sitting down there slicing little sheets of garlic or anything to dissolve into a sauce. I don't think it's quite that thin, but I haven't had any issues with the few things that I've cut with it. Having a very, very slight recurve here in the edge allows you to bite into something, and as you're drawing across, it's pulling the blade into that material that you're cutting even further. Everything about this knife just screams performer. And that's super important. When you're spending this amount of money, a lot of times we'll spend this much money on knives and we're justifying that by fancier materials, by the pretty finishes, hand rubbed satins or mirror polishes or, Damascus blades or things like that. A lot of times as a collector, you can justify a certain expense on a knife because of the visual gratification that you might get. This, I believe, will still satisfy most collectors, but this, I believe, is satisfying a different niche audience. Probably, I should say, less of a niche audience, but more of a generalized, broader audience. People that will actually use their knives and maybe in a survival situation. Now, I'm not calling this a survival knife. It doesn't fit that motif. But what I'm saying is in a situation where a knife may be called upon to, do something vital in the preservation of your life or another's life, in a survival situation where a lot of different shit has to get cut and dissected in order for you to be able to do some sort of emergency medical care or build a shelter or to prepare some animal to be cooked and eaten. This is the kind of knife that's going to appeal to you. You just have to figure out for yourself, can I justify nearly $400 to do that? Honestly, when you think of all the things that you could be using it for, I think it's fairly easy to do so. If I can justify knives for 10 times this amount of money that are just folding knives I'm going to carry in my pocket and may only cut a handful of things every time I carry it, but I'm spending that money because of a very high-grade action, or it's got Damas steel and Mokutai and things like that. If I can justify a tremendously more expensive knife for things that are less important, then I think there are definitely a lot of people out there that can look at this and see an actual value in this price. First off, they're going to go, USA made. I am totally willing to pay 30% more than what I would normally pay because I know that's the general premium for buying a US made product. And then they're going to look at the materials that it's being made out of. They're going to see that it's got a blade profile, an edge, and a handle that is going to serve well for the purposes that they're shopping for. And I don't see it being too much of an issue. For the people that are going to use this knife, they're going to enjoy the shit out of it. Keep in mind that you do get a lifetime warranty that covers anything and everything that has to do with this knife. No, he doesn't want you, trying to pry open car doors and shit with it because that's not what it's designed to do. But if you are using it within the realm of reality, within its scope of function, and you return nothing but a handle with the blade broken up here and go, hey man, this is what I was using the knife for and holy shit, it broke, then you're covered. He's going to make sure that that he either repairs or replaces that knife for you. And that's a really great thing to know that the brand is going to stand behind the quality of their products with almost no questions asked. That can be a very important thing as well. And that really adds to the value, honestly, in most people's opinions anyway. So them's my thoughts on the Tier 1 BC in CPM MagnaCut. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you on the next FOBOS Knives review.